Hi, everybody, and welcome back to video number 2 on Chapter 5. And as promised, here is an Excel spreadsheet titled Basic Time Value of Money Calculations, which you will find in the modules. And I think it'll be helpful for you. So let me go through it real quickly, and I think you'll get a basic understanding of some of the arithmetic calculations. I have another file that gets into this in a little more depth, which is also in the modules, and I'll be going through it later in this series on Chapter 5. Here, we put $1,000 in the bank at 10% interest rate. What's its value in 5 years? How would we calculate that? Well, I'll click here, and here we would look in table 5.1 on page 5-60 here, and you're going to see these values here, 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 and here. How did we get those values? So I'm going to look in the 10% column on page 5-60, and it actually is on page 5-61, and you'll see that the first 5 items on that page, as I look over at my book, are these calculations. How did I get that? Well, I start out in period 0. Period 0 is today, right now. And this is 1 year from now, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years from now. So period 0 is always going to be 1. So I'm going to multiply the previous cell times 1 plus the interest rate, just like we saw in the PowerPoint for that calculation methodology. So here, I just take this times 1.1. And 1.1 is 1 plus this 10% interest rate. Then I take this cell, and multiply it times 1.1. I get 1.2100. Then I take that 1.21, multiply it times 1.3, or times 1.1 times 1.21, I get 1.3131. You get the idea, okay? And that's how we get those calculations. Okay, now we haven't done this yet in the PowerPoint, but we're eventually going to get to a concept called present value. So let's look at that. Here would be an example. Present value of an amount, they call it present value of a sum, I believe. So we expect to have $1,651.51 in the bank in 5 years. The bank is expected to pay us 10% per year on our money. What is the present value of that amount? How much is it worth to me today to have a promise to pay that amount in the future? It's going to be less, obviously, because $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow. So here's how we would do the arithmetic, very similar to what we just did for future value. Here is table 5.1 calculation. And all I do to get to table 5.2 is take 1 and divide it by the amount in table 5.1. And that will give you these amounts here. And you'll find that these amounts in the 10% column in table 5.2. So what do I do with that? Let's take this 5th year factor of 0.62092 and multiply it times $1,610.51. And if I do that, I come back to $1,000. The present value of that amount, that sum of 1,610.51. Okay, everybody see how I did that? Okay. Now, we also have another concept called the future value of an annuity. All right, so if I look at the future value of annuity, here would be an example. We put $1,000 per year in the bank at a 10% rate for 5 consecutive years. What is the value of that annuity after 5 years? An annuity is a set sum per year. In this case, it's $1,000 each year, 5 times. So what we're going to do, what did I do? What we're going to do is the following. Same calculations here. We calculate these numbers here, and you'll find that this is in table 5.3. So all I'm doing is doing an addition of each one of these across cumulatively, right? So this 6.105 is the sum of all of these 5 items here. And that totals 6.10510. And if I look in table 5.3 for, let's do it, 5.3, I go for 10 periods, and I say table 5.3, and you can see at 10%, 6.10510 is the amount you'll see there for 5 years. Now you'll notice this is a little bit confusing in that we start with period 0 here, because we're putting that $1,000 in the bank in period 0. All right. So that's where we get that 6.1051. And so if I want to know how much that $1,000 is worth after 5 years, I take this factor, 6.10510, and multiply it times $1,000. And if I do that, I get $6,105.10. So a very useful calculation. But we also have the fourth kind of calculation, which is the present value of an annuity. So here we expect to receive $1,000 in the bank at a 10% interest rate for 5 consecutive years. What's the present value of that annuity? Well, what we would do is same kind of calculation here. Here's our table 5.1, here's table 5.2, and our cash flows here. Notice in this case, we're starting with period 1. And the present value, if I multiply these through for each one of these individually through times table 5.2, I get $3,790.79. But it's a whole lot easier to use table 5.4. So again, I'm doing a cumulative. Here's table 5.2. Then I add this, add that, add this, add that. And I get 3.79079. I multiply that times $1,000, and I get $3,790.79. And if I go to table 5.4, I look at the 10% column, you will see that that's exactly what you see for 5 years. Okay, so that's the arithmetic of how these are calculated. I think that's going to be helpful as you go through this to understand what you're doing a little bit better. Again, this is in the modules, so you'll have it to play with a little bit. Okay? All right. I'm going to end the video here, and when we come back, we'll bounce back into the PowerPoint and do some more problems that way. Until that time, bye for now.